Hi, everyone. I think we're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining. I know it's late in the afternoon. Energy levels are probably a little low, but I'm really excited to talk about one of the favorite features I've probably ever found in Salesforce that no one seems to know about, or very few people. So we're going to talk about Einstein case routing. A little bit about me. My name's Carrie McClouse. My pronouns are she, her. Currently, I'm the Salesforce architect at Acuity Insurance. This project that I'm going to talk about, though, was not done at Acuity. It was done at a prior company. MVP, Hall of Fame, but more importantly, if you're not in the Ohana Slack, get in the Ohana Slack. It's a really great resource for admins and devs alike. So the use case. The place I was at, we were very, very heavy email to case users. I know that's a bit old school, but I also know it's pretty still heavily used. We were using a tool called Power Router, which is an app exchange app to route cases. It's an awesome tool. No shade to Power Router by any means. I still use it to this day, and I highly recommend checking it out. We had just started to outgrow it a little bit. We were doing all of our routing for cases based on keywords in the subject or the body of the email. And also, all of our cases were manually tagged with a type and subtype that were required before they were closing the case. But we found that only about 50% of our cases were routing properly, and a lot of them weren't getting routed at all. They were kind of landing in what we called a tier 0 bucket that the customer support managers were having to look at for hours every day and manually triage cases to the different queues. So I kind of started thinking, we had all this type and subtype data. We'd been collecting it for years. We were using it for reporting, but I wanted to find out if there was a way we could use that to do routing. And then I stumbled on, we got a trial of Service Cloud Einstein, and I stumbled on Einstein Classification. The documentation in Salesforce Help is literally like 2 pages. There's like very little information out there on it. I posted in the Trailblazer community, had anyone ever used this, asked for help, got 0, it was like crickets. I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna give this a shot in a sandbox. So in our full sandbox, I routed our 2 highest volume email to case email addresses to the full sandbox. So they were still going to prod, but they were also going to the sandbox. In the sandbox, I enabled Einstein Case Classification, built the model to use the type and subtype fields, and then we were just using the case assignment rules based off the type and subtype to route those to the queues. Meanwhile, in production, everything was the same as normal. We were still requiring the type and subtype to close the case, and I just let that run for a couple weeks. And what that gave me was, in production, I had the human tags, type and subtype, and where it ended up routing to. And then in the sandbox, I had the Einstein type and subtype. So after that ran for a couple weeks, I was actually able to compare those two to see how accurate Einstein might be. And so I'm going to show you a demo, and there's a voiceover for the demo where I just walk you through how to actually enable Einstein, because I think as someone who is not a dev and has always been a declarative admin, I was always really nervous. I didn't think I could do Einstein. I was like, build a model. I don't know how to do that. But you'll see, it literally takes 5 minutes to get it built.
So I want to show you a quick demo on how to actually turn on and implement Einstein Case Classification and the routing.
Okay?
So the first thing you're going to want to do is get your queue set up. Whatever queues you're going to be assigning cases to obviously need to be set up here. You can see we have some just pretty standard billing, general, priority, etc. queues. Then you're going to build your assignment rules. So based on, in my instance, the type and subtype that Einstein picks for these cases, which queue do they want to go to? Because type is a broader bucket, Einstein is better, more accurate at predicting those broader buckets, because it just has more data to work with in those buckets. So we tried to assign based on type wherever possible. This is just a demo org, obviously, but just something to think about when designing your types and subtypes. Bigger buckets are going to be more accurate, especially for routing. So then you're going to go into the quick find, search for Einstein Classification, and turn it on. And it's going to think for a minute or so. And once it's turned on, this is what you'll see. This demo org actually already has a model built, but I'm going to build a new one from scratch just to show you what it looks like. So you hit this new model button, and I recommend naming your model what you're asking it to predict, just so it's easier to see, organize. This is where you tell it which cases you want it to provide predictions on. If you are limiting it to maybe one type of case or one channel for cases, so in our instance, when we rolled it out in prod, we limited it by the origin, and we had different origins for every inbound email. So, I might have said email service or whatever our different origins was. In this case, I'm just going to select email for the demo org, but this is where you can say, only give me predictions for this specific type of case or this specific inbound channel, whatever it is. And then this is where you tell it what cases to learn from. So if you use type and subtype in different ways across different segments of your business, or maybe you have internal cases for internal users to request features, whatever, and then you also use cases externally, those are obviously going to probably be different record types. You probably don't want to commingle those. So in our org, we were using cases globally across the board, but if you want to, you can limit which cases it uses to learn. The more cases you feed it, the more it has to learn from, and the more accurate the result will be. So I'm going to leave it as all cases right now. And then this is where you tell it which fields to learn from. So in my instance, we wanted it to learn from description and subject. Those are obviously, that's where it's going to look at the text in those fields and determine, based on the existing data, type and subtype, then it's going to be able to predict, okay, this looks like a billing case based on the subject or based on the description, so I'm going to tag it with a type of billing, for example. So we'll leave that the way it is. And then this is where you pick the fields to predict. So I'm going to choose type or subtype and type, case type. There we go. And then next. And here it's going to tell you whether or not you have enough data. This is telling me, because it's a demo org, I don't have enough data in this org to really probably make it. You can still build the model, but it's not going to have enough data to learn from. So that can be helpful. You do need to have, it says it typically wants between 400 and 1,000. When we did this in my org, we had over 10,000 records for it to build off of, which I think really helped the accuracy. And then you're going to click finish, and it's going to think, and it's going to have a status once it loads of building. Sorry, we have to build the model. And it'll say it can take many hours. I found it would usually take anywhere between 8 to 12 hours. Again, it's going to depend on how much data you have in there. I did sometimes find if it took over a day, there was maybe a bug, and I would have to contact Salesforce support and ping them. So just something to know, it shouldn't take more than a day. And then once the model is built, you can go back in here and you'll be able to activate it. Once it's activated, then it'll start predicting those case types, so then you'll want to make sure your assignment rules and everything are activated and ready to go. You can also, real quick, while I'm here, I will show you, you can look at performance, and it will tell you, it will tell you how accurate it is. There are also other ways to measure that as well, if you want. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for putting up with my pre-recorded demo. I don't trust the internet here for a live demo. But that just shows you how easy it is to implement. That's pretty much it. The only call out I would say is if you want to make a change to a model, you can deactivate it, make your change, reactivate it. Don't do that, though, because it might get stuck and be building for a couple days, and then your cases aren't routing. Ask me how I know that. So build another model first, Then when that one is done and ready to activate, then activate that one and deactivate your old one.
So I want to show you.
Sorry. There we go. All right, so what were the results of my test? What I found was when I just comparing, again, we had production, which was the human type and subtype, and we had the sandbox, which had the Einstein type and subtype. And what I found was that the match rate was pretty good. I think it was maybe around 70%. So I was like, that's okay, but I wanted more. I was actually expecting it to do better. And so then I started thinking about, I started looking at specific records, and what I saw some of the time was that Einstein maybe got it right, whereas the human maybe didn't. So the human might have just we had a lot of subtypes, as you can imagine, so they might have just picked the first one. They go, oh yeah, that sounds great, like billing customer help, whatever. Or question, I think was one of ours, like that could mean anything. Whereas Einstein actually got the type better some of the time. So the match rate maybe wasn't the most accurate. And so what I wanted to look at was if I actually ran the routing rules off of the type and subtype, would that be better than the 50% routing we were getting before? And so I asked our managers, our customer support managers, if we routed by type and subtype, where would you want stuff to go? And then did the same comparison on where did the case end up versus where would have Einstein have routed it, and the routing rate was much better. It was in the mid to high 80s. And then digging in even more, when I looked at our most numerous case types, for those top 5 case types, it was over 90% accuracy. And again, this was a limited test. It wasn't all of our email to cases, but it was enough to be pretty stoked and present this to the support managers. The other thing I saw was that the number of unrouted cases that would have to be manually triaged dropped pretty significantly in this test. So I presented this to the managers and the head of support. They were like, wait, what were you doing? But once I got to the results, they were pretty excited and decided to go live. The first thing we had to do, though, was clean up our type and subtype pick lists. Those were, as I'm sure can imagine, were kind of a hot mess, had been developed by a lot of different teams over the years, and were solely used for reporting. We wanted to still use them for reporting, but also use them for routing. And so we had to be a little bit strategic, because if you're routing based on a big bucket like type for billing, for example, if you can send all of your billing cases to one queue, that's going to be a lot more accurate. We couldn't always do that. Billing was an example where we had different tiers of billing teams, and some cases had to go to a tier 3 right off the bat. So sometimes we did have to route by subtype, but we tried to design the type and subtype to route by the bigger bucket as much as possible. And so that took actually a couple months to figure all that out and update the data. But once we did that, we were able to turn on Einstein classification. We started with one of our largest but simplest inbound email channels first. So when I built the model, I was able to limit which cases it was choosing the type and subtype for with just that channel. We also had a couple fields on the case object that we actually had these for a long time, but they were really useful for this project. These fields are powered by Flow. They just tagged the first queue that a case was assigned to and the last queue that a case was assigned to see how often cases were being reassigned to different teams. And right away, the anecdotal feedback was pretty great within the first week. The managers actually thought something was broken because they weren't even getting anything into the tier 2 or the tier 0 for a couple hours. But it was just that big of a drop. And so we very quickly, within a couple weeks, rolled it out to pretty much all of our other email to case inbound channels. I also added a route this case checkbox to the case object, and then created a new quick action to create a new case from an account. That all that quick action had was subject, description, and route this case. So anytime someone needed to create a case, like our partner managers, for example, would get calls a lot from our partners, and they wanted to quickly create a case for the CS team. In the past, they would have to sit there and say, okay, this I think falls under here, which I think is like tier 2 or 3, or I don't even know. So usually they would just put it in tier 0 and would have to get manually triaged. With this, all they had to do was click route this case. Einstein would tag the type and subtype, and it would automatically get routed to most likely the right team right off the bat. So that was a huge time saver as well. So the results. I was really lucky. I had a performance management team, or I forget, operations performance, something like that, where they had already done some time studies on some of this stuff, so I was able to get some pretty cool actual time data. We saw that the routing accuracy went from around 50% to 80%, and that was just in the first month. And the nice thing about Einstein 2 is over time, people didn't have to manually tag the type and subtype anymore, but we did ask them to check it and make sure it looked right. And so over time, Einstein, in theory, would only learn and get better as it went. The number of cases that were being manually triaged went down 17%. So we were getting more cases to the right people more often and faster, which was pretty cool. We also saw, as far as hours, the reduction in manual routing and tagging the type and subtype was 45 hours saved in the first month alone. And then the reduction in time for teams to manually create a case for CS went from like over a minute to just a couple seconds, basically as long as it took them to write out the subject and description. And then I don't have a time trial for this because as an admin, I don't like tracking my time, but it was a lot of work maintaining that keyword routing. As you can imagine, the CS managers were always trying to tweak that and be like, oh wait, let's add credit card to billing routing, or let's add, and they were almost, sometimes multiple times a week, but definitely every week we were making changes to that keyword routing, and it was just a big burden on the admin team, and at the time we were a team of 1, maybe 2. And so what's next? I am not at that company anymore. I actually left shortly after this went live, unfortunately, but the plan was to start getting into omnichannel and so we were using the Einstein case routing to put things into queues, but we were still using Power Router to then round robin from the queue to the person. So we wanted to put omnichannel into that part of it and have kind of skills-based routing and things like that. And then eventually do some live chat support with Agentforce on top of that as well. So that was kind of what was next on the agenda of that. But for email, the Einstein classification kind of blew my mind. Like I said, I had never really heard of it before. I've never seen it. I've been to every Dreamforce and TDX since 2010, and I had never seen it talked about once. So I'm really thankful for the opportunity to evangelize my new favorite Salesforce feature. And I think I have like 2 minutes for questions, or I'll be down over here if anyone, or over here if anyone wants to ask me a question. Thank you very much. And please give feedback.